If you look at India's economic trajectory over the last 10 years, it's been pretty remarkable. India has gone from being the 10th largest economy globally to now the 5th largest economy globally, only behind US, China, Japan, and Germany.
Welcome to India Rising. From ancient civilizations to a modern-day powerhouse, India is a nation that's not just dreaming big, it's achieving big. A place where billion-dollar companies are being built from the ground up, where young entrepreneurs are tackling global challenges, and where Indian CEOs are rising to lead some of the biggest corporations on the planet. To understand more about this entrepreneurial spirit that's being homegrown in India and exported to the world, I'm joined by Ridhi Chaudhary, Chief Investment Officer of Dragon Fund. Thank you very much for joining us today. Basically, we're looking at India being projected as having the highest growth in major economies this year. What's fueling India's growth story right now?
First of all, Pamela, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to be talking to you today about the India growth story. If you look at India's economic trajectory over the last 10 years, it's been pretty remarkable. With $4 trillion plus in GDP right now, over the last 10 years, India has gone from being the 10th largest economy globally to now the 5th largest economy globally, only behind US, China, Japan, and Germany. And with expected annual GDP growth rate in excess of 6 and 7%, India is well on its path to become the third largest economy globally, surpassing Japan and Germany and only behind US and China. This growth is being fueled by both domestic consumption as well as the export story, right? So if we talk about domestic consumption, thanks to being the most populous country with 1.4 billion people and its relatively young demographic, India has a large middle class that continues to grow in size and disposable income, which is fueling domestic consumption, and this is making India a very interesting market for both domestic and international companies. If we talk about exports have also kept pace with India's GDP growth. But over the years, the nature of these exports have changed from being more traditional exports like gems and textiles to now being more high-value and tech-driven exports, for example, in IT services and pharmaceuticals. And that is thanks to India's large base of skilled workforce that is proficient in English and India's low-cost advantage. But both the domestic growth story as well as the export growth story is also supported by a robust investment both from the government as well as the private sector.
And perhaps part of the growth story is also, if you can characterize for our viewers and listeners, the de-dollarization, the impact that had on the economy, and perhaps FX in terms of the stability of the currency now.
Yeah, the currency has definitely become more stable. I mean, there are periods of volatile, but if you look at the long-term performance of the currency, the depreciation has been more contained in the 2 to 3% region. So I think we definitely appreciate the increased stability in currency and the financial stability in general of the country.
Yeah, and now let's talk about the startups in India, specifically the unicorns, those with market cap above $1 billion. India is ranked number 3 globally for producing unicorns. Why is that?
Yeah, the startup ecosystem in the country has really flourished, and all of this has happened mostly in the last decade. And the reason for that is there are a few things going on in favor of India. So on the demand side, India presents a large market opportunity. We spoke about its large population and the rising middle class, but that alone basically is a large enough opportunity and a growing market opportunity for startups to build for India and build at a scale where these startups can become large companies and billion-dollar plus companies and so on and so forth. Also, there has been a robust digital transformation in the country that is happening. If you just look at over the last 10 years, the number of people who have internet access in India have gone from roughly 250 million to now close to billion people. There are a billion people in this country that have access to smartphone, high-speed internet, and are consuming probably amongst the highest amount of data globally at a very low cost. And this allows basically these startups to target this large base of population regardless of the location. So that's on the demand side. On the supply side, the people who are building these startups, I mean, India has a lot of talented, smart people. But what has happened recently is also a mindset shift where these talented individuals are now looking at pursuing entrepreneurship as a viable career option. That wasn't the case until 5-10 years ago. And that is very powerful because in a country when the brightest minds want to build and take risk, and that is supported by the right amount of PE and VC capital that's available in the country, because that's extremely important. That has resulted in a very nice machinery humming, and that is resulting in the startup ecosystem booming.
In the Silicon Valley folklore, people believe that a lot of these startups start off in basements of Palo Alto or Menlo Park. Where did the startups start in India?
Yeah, so in India, these startups are really coming from across the country, from various cities. Of course, there are key hubs that dominate that ecosystem. I think the top 3 hubs are today Bangalore, Mumbai, and Delhi NCR. It has been that way for some time. I think until 2020, more than 80% of the large startups or unicorns were from these key hubs. But more recently, we are seeing also interesting and dominant startups coming from other cities.
And in terms of industries that these startups focus on, is it in a particular area? Is it e-commerce? Is it logistics? Is it AI? Where is it emerging?
Yeah, so I think the big theme is most of the large unicorns that have been built in the country so far have been on the back of increasing digital adoption. That has basically allowed these startups to offer online solutions that offer convenience and a potentially lower cost compared to their traditional offline peers, right? So name a few themes. E-commerce or consumer internet is a big one. Flipkart would fall in that category. That was acquired by Walmart for $17 billion or around that mark. But if you broadly dissect, there are a lot of large companies in that e-commerce consumer internet space. There are horizontal plays. For example, 2 companies that we have backed from Dragon Fund, Meesho and Zepto, that would fall in that bucket.
And it's not just startups being created within India. There's also a lot of exported talent. Some of the Fortune 500 companies are being led by Indian homegrown talent.
Yeah, and it's a matter of great pride for the country that its people are now going on to become such successful leaders and are in such influential positions at a global scale, and primarily in technology sector. And by the way, it's not just the CEO world where Indians are crushing it. They're also making their mark in Silicon Valley or the startup ecosystem in the US, where India-born founders are now the most prolific immigrant community in the US unicorn universe. I think they account for close to 20% of all US unicorns that are founded by non-US born founders, which is quite remarkable because that number is essentially, I would think, about 80-90 unicorns, which is quite significant when you look at India that has a total of, say, 120-130 unicorns.
And what do you attribute that to? Is it sort of the education? Is it the cultural aspect? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's partly because of the highly competitive nature of the Indian education and the job market, where a lot of talented, hardworking people with limited means, humble background, but they have the hunger to basically do well and build a better life for themselves, are then competing for limited resources and job opportunities. And that results in a culture of course, hard work, excellence, but a drive for success.
And you grew up in India yourself. How has India changed in your lifetime?
Okay, my lifetime, it has definitely changed a lot. It has gone from being a struggling economy to now the 5th largest economy and the fastest growing major economy. I think, so I was born in the 80s, but I think as far as I can remember, I think it really started from the major economic reforms of the 1991. That really was a major step towards the liberalization of the economy, privatization of a lot of important sectors that were earlier being inefficiently run by the government, and really opening up of the country to foreign trade and investment. And when typically that happens in the country, it always is good for its future growth prospects.
Yeah, and you yourself emerged from India's technology ecosystem. You studied technology and electrical engineering at IIT Delhi. You do mention digital transformation as part of the growth story. Do you think that's the main driver of more students in India taking up STEM degrees?
Absolutely. I mean, just to share some facts, about 35% of the graduates in India are actually STEM graduates, which is quite a large number when you compare it to what that number is in some of the other major economies. For example, in US, that number, I believe, is shy of 20%. And when you multiply that high percentage of STEM graduates with a large population of India, what that leads to India essentially contributing to over 30% of all STEM graduates globally. So India has essentially become this talent factory for the world, for lack of a better terminology.
That very much so. You are an example. You've also worked for Boston Consulting Group and Goldman Sachs. These are big global names in finance. Why do you think these big multinationals are narrowing in on India?
The big multinationals cannot afford to ignore India. Just to give you a couple of examples, India is now the third largest market for smartphones, the sixth largest market for cars. Big multinationals like Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Meta, Walmart, they continuously talk about India as a key market for them and a big driver for their future growth. Just to give you an example of Goldman Sachs, although I did not work in the GCC in Bangalore, but that employs now over 5,000 people and is the largest office for Goldman Sachs outside of United States, which is pretty remarkable. And we hire, the best talent from the country, from IITs and other engineering and business school to work in that office for Goldman Sachs.
How are some of the other industries or sectors that are thriving?
Yes, so manufacturing is doing quite well. Healthcare is doing well, partly because of, unfortunately, increasing incidence of chronic illnesses, but now people also having higher amount of disposable income to seek the right treatment for those illnesses. And then financial services growing. That's just a function of increasing penetration. A large part of population still does not have access to bank accounts.
Yeah, the energy transition story is certainly a big one for India with its resources. I'm curious when it comes to, over the past year, we heard a lot about various different foreign companies going into India to do public listings or IPOs from various different industries and countries. For investors who are outside of the country, what's the easiest way for them to get access to this growth story?
Sure. So there are multiple ways. Very straightforward is you can buy ETFs or exchange traded funds if you don't want to navigate the complexity of the regulatory landscape. You can either buy broad emerging market ETFs with India exposure, or you can also buy country-specific ETFs. But if you want to buy specific listed securities or bonds, then if you're an individual, you'll have to open a demat account. If you're an institutional investor, you can get registered as an FPI investor and do that. If you want access to asset classes beyond the traditional bonds and stocks, then you can basically consider investing under the FDI or the foreign direct investment route, or investing now in a vehicle called AIF or alternative investment funds that can give you an exposure to, for example, startups in India.
And when it comes to sort of the longer term horizon, do you see India as peaking, or is it just beginning, just starting? Is it going to be like China, where it's going to be a multi-decade growth story?
Well, some economists and global leaders will tell you that this is India's century. And while century is a long period of time, I certainly believe that this is a multi-decade growth story. The world has only begun to take notice of India and its global leaders taking world stage. India has a lot going on for it. Not to say that there aren't any challenges and it's all a bed of roses. There are definitely challenges. Top of mind is creation of employment for the youth of the country. But that being said, a lot that is in favor of India. It's large working class population, the digital transformation, the supply chain diversification, helping the manufacturing industry. So I would certainly not say that India has peaked, and I would certainly not bet against India.
Thank you very much for that insight. A big thank you to our special guest, Ridhi Chaudhary, Chief Investment Officer of Dragon Fund. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of IC Your Trade Season 5. IC Your Trade is brought to you by IC Markets, the leading high-performance trading provider. Trade up to IC Markets. See you next time.